Hey guys, today we'll be surviving the apocalypse in post-nuclear Kentucky. Now, I've covered the events of week 1 prior to the nuke pretty extensively, so we're just gonna skip ahead to life in the fallout, and by request, talk about how to deal with bandits. So if you're interested in that, stick around. Now, unlike my first week 1, this one wouldn't be all that active with bandits. I'm not sure if this is some random seeding from the mod itself, malfunctions, or intended behavior, but bandits have mostly stayed in their shacks until they died from radiation. And the CDC was still snooping around, of course, but less than before. So things have been pretty quiet. It was just me, my Zeds, and I. That is, until my girlfriend showed up. But more on that later. To begin at the beginning, once the bombs started dropping, I headed into my neighbor's basement where I had stashed some supplies. Mostly loot from bandits and a treadmill to barricade the staircase. When I went topside, I was surprised to see that the fallout hadn't actually started falling yet. But it started to come down around noon, and when that happened, I ran my happy ass back home and started reading some books. Now, I did have a generator magazine, which was good, but my generator and all the generators in my neighborhood had disappeared, so finding another generator would be my first problem. The second would be clearing the neighborhood in the fallout without a hazmat suit. The effects of being drunk, sick, panicked, and the reduced visibility weren't exactly ideal, but a couple CDC representatives showing up was. So after they punched out for the day, I was a couple hazmat suits richer. From there, it was a matter of clearing out the rest of the neighborhood. But the Z numbers were nothing to scoff at, and pretty quickly I headed back to the basement for a resupply. And then I got into a little bit of a bad situation by attracting Zeds into my home. But I was able to get back outside and lead them away from the house. And despite the resupply, I was soon short of ammo, and I had to get creative. So I kited the horde around a fence and hopped over, where I switched to melee in the hopes of drawing less attention to myself, because I needed to get back into that basement for another resupply. Eventually, I did get that done, but the Zeds would not let up. So I used the tall fence once more and swapped to the M14, and things continued on in this fashion for the rest of the evening, until eventually I fought my way back into the basement. But I kind of forgot to mention something about the hazmat suits. The hazmat suits require an air tank in order to work, but the thing is, none of them run out of air, and you don't need to worry about refilling the tanks or managing your air consumption. They just last forever. Anyway, the next day it was back to securing the neighborhood and gathering up loot from bandits, which was my main source of food while living in the fallout zone. Now, I knew that the south of Muldrow was fallout free, so I decided to take a field trip down there and see if there was any bandits around and what was going on down there. There happened to be a few survivors and a few Zeds, but most importantly for me, there were bandit homes with generators and a working ambulance. But after that, a new problem cropped up when I noticed that the nuclear winter effect was dropping temperatures drastically, sometimes as low as -50 and worse. And because I wasn't dressed warmly enough, I ended up catching a cold. Anyway, the point of this video is to show life in the fallout zone, so we're gonna skip ahead again. But I will say here a couple of things about life outside of the fallout zone. There is, of course, more food and more loot, tools, and even some literature. The gas station is still working, and the roadblock is still there with plenty of vehicles to be looted And the militia guys are even there, still guarding it. And life is more comfortable out here, but it kind of feels like cheating for the purposes of my playthrough. So after a couple of days, I returned home to the Fallout Zone with those tools and a generator, and I began my life out there. And here's a couple cold hard facts about life during nuclear winter. The ground is frozen, so I can't grow crops. And I've tried, but I haven't found success with trapping. Fishing is an option, but I don't have the materials or the knowledge. And also, my bandit loot is limited, even though bandits occasionally show up from time to time and deliver me some more. And then there is the water situation. I don't have the low-level carpentry book, so I have to brute force my way to level 3 before I can make collectors. In the meantime, I would end up setting out tin cans to collect rain and snow, and until then, I lived off of the water bottles I've been collecting since before the nukes even dropped. Anyway, I was curious to know if Northern Muldrow was Fallout free the way the South was, so the next day I took the van north in order to find out. Along the way, I was surprised to see that there was actually a few survivors up there, but yeah, it was completely nuked out all the way to the northern roadblock. So after that discovery, I headed back home and began improving things out there. Now the first step in improving any base in Project Zomboid typically requires carpentry, so I got to work chopping down trees. And to brute force my carpentry skills, there really was nothing to do except build. So build I did. The idea was to surround the house with fresh walls, put some planks up on the windows, and at least get some doors up. But now's as good a time as any to talk about bandits and how to deal with them. Generally speaking, the best way to deal with bandits is with guns, and also one at a time, or even better yet, just run them over. I would generally recommend avoiding melee combat when it comes to NPCs, bandit or otherwise, because it's pretty easy for you to get stun locked, and if you take damage to one of your legs, now you're limping. If you take damage to your neck, now you're bleeding out, and pretty quickly. Now, before the nukes ever drop, you probably don't need to interact with the bandits if you don't want to. Typically, you can avoid them and someone else kills them. And in fact, through updates to the mod, it seems at the time of this recording that the civilians and police tend to kick the bandits' ass more often than not. But if you are going to fight bandits, try to wear as much armor as you can. This can easily save you. And then try to isolate the fights, because bandits usually run in packs. And even if you have guns, unless you've got a few aim levels, it probably won't matter if there's like 6 of them. But you should also know you can generally abuse their awkward NPC behavior. For instance, they tend to fixate on barricades and taking them down. So if you barricade your windows and they say come at night and cut off your generator, you can probably walk out of your front door and just shoot them in the back. Like this. So be sure to put up some barricades. Also, bandits are susceptible to exhaustion, so if you need to, running is always a good option. And honestly, so is baiting them into Zeds or even letting the CDC kill them, so keep those in mind as well. Also, the marker system is almost always going to alert you to their presence, so you shouldn't necessarily be caught off guard, though sometimes they will sneak up on you. But even then, they usually start shouting and give themselves away. Last thing I'll say about it before moving on is that the CDC guys are like the king of the bandits. They are pretty deadly, and you'll want to be extra careful around them. And they're even pretty good at killing Zeds, actually. So run them over, cheese them in doorways, or hope they get killed by Zeds, but don't give them a chance to aim at you. They'll more than likely put one in your head, which you can't actually survive, but just make sure you also have tweezers and suture needles on you, and bandages, and painkillers. But anyway, let's get back to base building. Now, I would continue to harvest wood and try my luck with traps and live off of bandit food and drink and even take the time to pick up the trash in my yard, but on the 30th of July it would sort of register to me that basements would still have loot, and I was lucky enough to find a good amount of ammo in this one near my own house. And then on the 1st of August, a new bandit moved into the neighborhood, but seeing as he couldn't be persuaded to join me or to even acknowledge my existence, I left him alone. It was also on this day I would finally hit Carpentry 3, which meant I could now craft those precious water collectors, and because it was snowing all the time, my water needs were pretty much solved permanently. So I then celebrated that accomplishment with some recreational foraging, but most of the finds were trash and CDC pamphlets. Anyway, as you can see here, the snow is filling up the water collector and eventually would fill it all the way up since it never stopped snowing. Now, it was about this time I started to move on from improving my base and started exploring the rest of destroyed Muldrow. I was looking for those basements and whatever lost loot that they might have. But more important than all of that was my new live-in girlfriend, Emily. Emily Martin. It was how I always pictured it, her standing in a bush, putting a band-aid on her arm, and me already with a basement. And she actually listened when I told her to follow me. It was perfect. As things turned out, she would be a little mouthy, but I wanted her to live anyways. She was crazy, and I liked that. So I kept her locked up in the basement. And then I went about my business clearing the rest of Muldrow. Now, when a town's been nuked, clearing it is actually pretty fast. The only places to loot are those basements, and as far as I've seen, the Zed population was spread out pretty randomly. But after a long day's work of searching basements, I came home to find Emily was right where I had left her. Evidently, she was still feeling a little bit sassy after being locked up all day, so I decided I would let her outside the following morning, which was apparently a terrible mistake. And this is one of those kicking myself for messing up another recording moments, but suffice it to say, when I took Emily to meet the neighbors, she went berserk and charged right into their little shithole shack and started attacking them. The only problem was one of them had a machete, and Emily, she never saw it coming. And just like that, she was gone. In fact, they were all gone. But you know what? Life goes on. I went home and continued working on the house, and I turned my attentions to crafting, which was kind of bottlenecked by needing a bucket, so I went back to basement hunting like immediately after that. And while I wouldn't find a bucket, I did find a wood stove, which I let burn overnight, curing my cold in the process. And the next couple weeks would essentially be spent fighting Zeds and looting more basements, where I would sometimes find still good ice cream and put on a couple pounds. And then more bandits would continue to move into the neighborhood every now and then and die to radiation, and then I would take their food. And actually one time I even found a stray chicken and later rabbits, so apparently livestock is still an option in the Fallout zone, at least for now. Maybe Slayer will find a way to make sure all the animals are dead or that they die to Fallout, but for the moment they're still there. But as I approach the month mark of Fallout survival, I am beginning to worry about food. these cans of corned beef are not going to last forever. Now, there is a lake nearby, but I'm still too stupid to craft a fishing pole. And anyway, by now I think you get the idea of what it's like to survive in the Fallout zone. I do want to say this though, the week 1 mod actually is pretty cool for setting up a do-it-yourself, outdoorsy, wilderness survival type playthrough. But I do kind of wish that it wasn't so easy for me to escape the Fallout. But if I'm being honest, it's not that much more difficult in the Fallout zone than it is outside of it, because in my other playthrough, the Bandit and CDC presence out there was actually much heavier, which made it harder to survive out there. And either way, with the new nuclear winter effect, the ground is frozen and you're not able to farm crops, at least if you're not clever like this. So it's hard either way, inside or outside the Fallout zone. But I'm gonna wrap the video up here. Please feel free to share any thoughts, questions, or concerns in the comments down below. Alright, I'm out. Peace.